Welcome to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Friday, October 28th, and joining me live is Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Rent. We started talking about this in the last episode. I want to bring it back and kind of put some clarity to it. There's some interesting things that are happening in the rent market. And from a pricing standpoint, actually in some markets, we're seeing rent starting to go down.
That's right. So here's what's happening. And we talked about this a little bit. The way the Fed measures rent and CPI lags the Zillow rent index. When we see market rent growth, it mostly reflects new leases, right? People are moving, and people who move tend to be the ones facing higher rents. And we measure that at Zillow. And so the Fed doesn't do that. The Fed tries to impute rents for owner-occupied housing. Like if Chris Krug, you were to put your house up for rent right now, what would it cost you, right?
I'm not sure, but I would love to do that. That'd be great.
Right, exactly. And so no, rent growth is still ongoing. Rents are increasing. However, rent growth peaked back in February. So rents are coming up slower, right? Okay. More slowly now. And so you have rent increases that ongoing 2021, 2022, in some markets, astronomical. Renting.
Two things I want to ask you. I'll ask you about tech layoffs as it pertains to rents in major cities and maybe some of the growth cities that we saw, cities where the growth was augmented by remote work during COVID. So, I mean, with the tech layoffs, that have been announced, of course, Elon Musk took over Twitter. First thing that he did was to basically tell, 3/4 of the workforce that it's been great having you, but you don't work here anymore. And then there have been other tech layoffs that have happened, and those will disproportionately affect tech cities and places where tech people have migrated to work remotely. Places like Boise, Idaho, and Austin, Texas, and some other places. So what impact will this group have in the market, and when would that be realized statistically?
I got to say, I am not sure that the impact will be great. And here's why I'm saying that. We live in a different world. If you had told me this, 10 years ago, I would have said, yeah, people move for work. Nowadays, remote work is the thing, isn't it? Especially in the tech sector.
Well, it is for now. I don't know if that's going to be sustainable. I can't read the future.
For sure, but it is definitely sticky, especially in the tech sector.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that tech workers moving jobs could translate to tech workers either selling their homes or having to rent a different place or having to move across the country, I don't think holds very much. I think most people in that industry, I'll give you an example. I am fully remote, Chris. I don't actually have to leave my office in my house.
It's amazing.
Ever. Right? Isn't that amazing? That's where we're going. And so I don't think we'll see a massive impact in the housing market because of tech layoffs. And of course, I feel for the people who are having to leave jobs, behind, Twitter, all these other companies. Absolutely understand. The economy is where it's at. There's storms ahead. Some companies are cutting back. But ultimately, I don't think this is going to have a huge effect on the housing market.
Let me ask you the next question.
Yeah.
So have enough people been affected by this economy that we are starting to see more multi-generational family arrangements, people moving back in with their parents, people who had previously lived on their own, getting roommates and consolidating? Is that having any kind of impact?
That's the thing. Are we seeing that yet, though? I'm not sure we're seeing that yet.
I don't know.
Right. I don't think we're seeing that yet, right? So, in the housing market, we know potential sellers are not selling. They're holding back. They're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep my very low mortgage rate, and I'm not going to trade it in. I'm going to stay in my house as long as I can. So unless you start to see a mass layoff event, and even then, I'm not sure.
How about this idea? How about second home inventory?
Oh,
Properties that were purchased for the use of like doing like Airbnb or short-term rental.
yes.
Are those, I mean, vacations become somewhat difficult when you don't have enough money to buy
That's
your $4 dozen of eggs.
That's right.
So are we starting to see some of those housing units come onto the market?
I'm not sure we're there yet, but this is the part of the housing market that usually takes a hit in a contraction, right? And so as we head into those gathering storms, that is the part of the market that could potentially take a big hit. And even on the demand side already, the slowing demand, part of it is like, hey, you know what? I'm going to pass on that second home now. I'm going to pass because, it's just going to be too costly to finance that next purchase. And so, that is definitely a sector of the economy that it could be in trouble. But yeah, I think going back to rents, we have rents in these major cities that are 54% of the typical household income.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's bonkers in some markets, like unsustainably high. I mean, in the metro areas, and it's I don't know. When I think about it, I think it's typically it's New York, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, the idea of like a $5,000 monthly rent, for whatever, 1,000 square feet or something like that, where you're paying, $60,000 a year for the privilege of living in a space. That I think even for for high income people,
that's right.
that starts to become like it's untenable, and it makes no sense for them at some point.
That's right. That's right. And that is the part of the downward pressure that we're seeing on rent growth comes from both more landlords coming into the market, but also to take advantage of these high prices, but also the fact that renters are so squeezed now with the price of everything going up. They're not ready to move and sign that new lease. In many cases, it's much better to just stay in your current home than it is to move and sign a new lease because you're going to get a big rent increase. And so sadly, this is what's happening. Unfortunately, in those cities, when the rent goes up, the risk of homelessness also goes up. So on the low end, you have people who are pushed. There's a nice research study that was done a few years ago that says that basically homelessness rises faster in areas where the rent exceeds a third of household income. And look, there are at least 18 metro areas across the country where that's already happened. And you would think they'd be all on the coast. But guess what? Memphis, Tennessee happens to be one of them.
Why is that specific to that market? Do you have any insight?
This is just an example. There are many markets inside the country where rent is, typical rent is now 35, 40% of a household income.
Is that because of low wages? I mean, when you talk in percentages, I mean,
it's a combination of factors. It's rent growth outpacing income.
Gotcha.
You have that going on across the country. Rents tend to follow prices. And during the pandemic, so rapid price increases, you have landlords who are like, well, you know what? I could sell my house or I could charge you more. And in those cases, unfortunately, you see these rent increases. What I worry about is people on the low end, right? I worry about the fact that homelessness could increase as a result. And that we need more landlords. We need more housing units to come on the market to help absorb the need that's out there.
Well, I appreciate your insights as always. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts on americastalking.com.